O death shadow, creeping shade, that lurks in those corners at night, of what darkness are you made, that keeps you hidden out of sight? I am once again honoured to invite Mortis Media to aid in the narration of these subscribers' stories. What follows are 4 tales of shadow figures claimed to be true by those of you who submitted them. So sit back and enjoy, and why not keep a light on, lest these entities visit you next.
My parents separated when I was in my mother's womb. When I was a kid, around 6 or 7 years old, we lived in a small house with a loft. It was in that loft that my mum, my sister and I slept. Below the loft there was another bed, where my aunt and uncle sometimes slept. But this would only happen when my mother would have to go to work, and they'd sleep over to take care of my sister and I. One night, I woke up, seeing myself sleeping. I was floating above my sleeping body. Despite the strangeness of the experience, I wasn't scared. I flew higher and saw my mum and sister. I flew around the house and saw my aunt and uncle. I then awoke in the same position I had seen myself. It had been so vivid that it had not felt like a dream. Fast forward to 2009, and I was working as a software engineer. I had moved to a different house to be closer to my work. One time, I was reading a thread in a forum dedicated to paranormal stories, when I chanced upon a similar story to what had happened to me as a child. The memory of my experience re-energized. I was gripped by the need to find out more. I researched further and learned that what I had experienced was called astral projection, or OBE, an out-of-body experience. I want to experience it again, so I looked for ways someone can learn to do it consciously. Back when I was a kid, it had been an unconsciously triggered experience. As clearly as I could remember it, I had not willed it to happen. But now, I wanted to will it, and I wanted to control the experience. One post suggested that I should try going to the New Age section of a bookstore and try looking there. I went to a local bookstore and found a book that teaches OBE step by step. I bought the book, and because of my excitement, started reading it on the bus home. With the book as my guide, I started training. I meditated to strengthen my chakra points and worked towards manipulating my own energy. I did this in my room for 15 minutes to an hour each day, and after a week or two, I could feel that there was a difference in my perception. I had become more sensitive to the sounds around me, and sometimes had goosebumps out of nowhere, almost like I were becoming more in tune to an unseen energy. Despite this, I was as of yet unable to trigger an out-of-body experience. I kept practicing. According to the book, it could take weeks, months, or several years to achieve what I desired. At the time, I woke up each morning at 4 a.m, so as to give me enough time to get ready for work and leave the house by 5, so that I could avoid the inevitable morning traffic. On the 3rd week of my training, I started waking up even earlier. I did not even look at the time, but I knew it was definitely before 4 a.m, as my alarm had not yet sounded. Every time I did this, I would feel that someone was watching me. Glancing around the room, dimly lit by a light outside my window, I would see no one, and nothing. I was alone but felt otherwise. This happened many times, One night I woke up with the usual feeling of being watched. This time, however, I did not look around me, but instead decided to roll over to change sides. As I did this, I saw someone at the foot of my bed, a dark, shadowy figure, looking at me. In an instant, I was unable to move my body. I was sweating profusely and felt like my head was going to explode. I tried to call for help, but no sound was coming out of me. At that moment, I remembered something that I had read in the book. It said that whenever you are paralyzed, you should try to move at least one finger. The theory was to start from something small to release your whole body. I tried moving the fingers on one of my hands, but not a single one moved. Next, I tried to move my right foot, concentrating on a single toe. With a great amount of effort, I was able to move it. And after that, I was able to move my entire body and finished rolling over. I was still sweating and could not speak due to the exhaustion. The image of the shadow figure burned into the space behind my eyes. It took a lot of courage, but I managed to look at the foot of my bed again. It was gone. A great relief washed over me. I felt so tired that I quickly fell back asleep. I don't know if minutes or hours passed, but I heard my alarm clock. I hurriedly took a shower, put on my clothes, and got myself out of the room as fast as I could. I didn't even bother looking at the mirror to fix my hair. I think it was only 4:15 or 4:20 when I left. After that experience, I stopped practicing the exercises in the book. There were a few nights that I would wake up before my alarm and feel the presence. Eventually, it stopped. I no longer feel as sensitive as I did back then. Truly, I just went back to how I was before ever touching that book. I still own the book, and there are times when I am tempted to start my training again. But I never do. The fear and terror that I felt that night remind me that I never should again.
Of all my encounters with the paranormal, this is still the hardest one for me to talk about. Even thinking about it is taboo, as I've found that the subject of this story doesn't like it when I tell others about him. I will endeavour to tell the whole tale here though, as I want to have it written down. I also want this to serve as a cautionary tale to those who would dabble in darkness. I was 14 and at the height of my teenage rebellion phase. Several months before, I had stumbled across a website for Satanists. As a rebel in an extremely Christian and rural town, I found the site's message of Lucifer's devotion to his followers and the good teachings of the religion very intriguing. This version of Satanism wasn't devil worshipping. It was revering the one true God whom Christians had vilified over the centuries. The site spoke of many different things, from different demons, their abilities and how to summon them, to how to strengthen your psychic abilities through meditations. I had always been quite sensitive to spirits and energies, and the idea of becoming even stronger was incredibly appealing. While I wasn't entirely sure that this Satanism was a good idea, I thought that the meditations could do no harm. It was just relaxing and muttering the same sound over and over after all. I did the meditations every day as prescribed, and at the end my forehead would ache, like I had just put it through the most intense workout. I must admit that over the next couple of months my abilities seemed to increase. Innocuous though it may be, I was able to predict the next song on the radio before it aired. I could very often finish someone's sentence, or even provide their next sentence for them. Was this because I listened to the radio station long enough to know the loops? Perhaps. Was this because I was very skilled at reading body language and making inferences? Perhaps. It still happened with uncanny frequency. Over time, I began to think that perhaps there was credence in this Satanism thing. The website said that if you emptied your mind like for meditations and reached out to Father Lucifer, you could talk to him. He wasn't like the Christian God who never showed you his presence. I tried it and was astonished to feel something on the other end. An energy, old and eternal, stern, yet warm. This solidified my belief in this religion, and I longed to complete the initiation ritual, in which the devotee willfully pledges their mind and soul to Father Lucifer. But as a child under her parents' watchful gaze, I couldn't procure the necessary items, and therefore completed the pledge during meditation. If I had known then what I know now, I would have never ever done any of this. I will have to live with fear and uncertainty for the rest of my life now. It was May, and 3 months of summer vacation had just begun. I had been keeping my budding secret of Satanism from everyone for several months, knowing that they wouldn't understand. As I often did when I was bored, I took my bike for a ride down this half-mile dirt lane that connected our property to the neighbours'. To the left of the lane were fields, and starting halfway down the lane on the right were woods inhabited by turkey and deer. The place where the woods started was called the junk pile, as it was where my great-grandparents had tossed old machinery and other things that couldn't be burnt. I spent many an afternoon wandering around those woods, looking for marvels from days gone by. Old bottles, a wagon wheel that had been partially absorbed by an obstinate tree. On that day, as I neared the tree line, I felt that prickle at the back of my neck that signalled a presence. By this point, I was so familiar with all the spirits on the grounds and their unique energies that I didn't have to look up to know who had come to visit. But this one I had never felt before. It was colder and odder. Normally I could focus on an energy and glean more information about them, their gender, age, disposition, the decade in which they had died. Perhaps I could even extrapolate an image of them, even if they hadn't made themselves visible to me. But this one was slippery. All I could tell that it was vaguely masculine and ageless. I stopped my bike before the start of the trees and peered in. There, a couple of rows of trees in, stood a tall black shadow. It was easily over 6 feet tall and had no distinguishable features, but its blackness was so replete that it almost seemed to drain the colour of its surroundings. "Who are you?" I demanded of it. "What do you want?" It didn't speak and it didn't move, but I could feel its will in my mind. It pressed its feelings into my mind like one presses a dry cloth into a pond. There was a brief moment of resistance, a soft whoosh, and then the cloth is totally submerged and one with the body of the water. When the cloth is moved, currents and ripples are created, and this thing's will felt like ripples that are not language that we understand. It is hard to put its will into words here, as it has never spoken words in my head, yet I understand it to my core. "Come," it beckoned. "Come into the trees." "No," I refused. "You come to me." It urged me to enter the trees once again, but I resisted. I knew that it wanted my presence, yet I refused to leave the refuge of the shady woods. The dirt lane I stood on with my bike was bathed in sunlight. I was unnerved by this. Generally, only negative energies shied away from light like this one, and it was the first time I had seen it on our property. I told it I would be back tomorrow, rode my bike home, and called my friends to tell them about this new spirit. We spent a couple of hours guessing what it could be. The following day, I rode my bike to the junk pile once more. It was there again, almost like it was waiting for me. I continued with the same line of questions as the previous day. What are you? Where did you come from? Why are you here? What do you want? It never answered my questions. It only willed that I step into the shade of the woods. The part of me that was familiar with ghosts was alarmed by this thing that was so clearly not a ghost. Today, its energy had become easier to grasp. I could feel that, whatever it was not human. Perhaps it had once been a man many centuries ago, but now it was something much older and powerful than a simple ghost. I positively burned to know more about this thing. Unwittingly, as I continued repeating my queries, I found myself stepping away from the safety of the sunny lane and nearer to the murky woods where it seemed to teleport from tree to tree. Finally, my toes were mere inches from the boundary of light and shadow, and the moment I took this final step, the shadow vanished from the trees. But this was no vanishing act like with a skittish ghost. Rather, its presence was tenfold, beating down upon my back like a hail of ice. I swirled around and could hardly breathe. This shadow, billowing up to well over 7 feet, was standing between me and my bicycle. It had no arms or legs or a face. It radiated a cold strength so oppressive my knees trembled, as if it had been concealing its true aura until now. Until this point, I had thought that it was bound to the shadows, and as such had thought it wouldn't be able to follow me. I thought I had had a modicum of safety. I was wrong. I ran, forgetting the bike, I ran with everything I had. I could feel it behind me, not gliding or running, but sort of teleporting from place to place behind me. It could close the distance between us in the time it took me to blink, but it chose not to. It liked the chase, liked my terror and the fact that it was the cause. I shot into the house like a bullet and headed into my bedroom, where I drew the curtains tight and curled up under my blankets as I shivered. I couldn't tell my family, as they didn't like it when I talked about my experiences. I ate dinner, casting glances out the living room window, but saw nothing. I hoped that it had given up and returned to the woods. I vowed never to go there again. Unable to sense its presence nearby, I went to sleep that night, hopeful that it was gone. In the middle of the night, I awoke thirsty, so I headed to the kitchen to grab a drink. There were 2 windows in the kitchen, and the moment I stepped into the room and happened to glance out the window into the night, my blood stilled. It was there, just on the other side of the glass, blacker even than the night itself, except for a crazed, white grin that looked like it had been cut out with razors. To this day, that is still the most chilling image I have ever seen. It is burned into my mind. Nearly as chilling as its jagged grin was the fact that my house was slightly elevated, and that window was nearly 10 feet off the ground. I completely forgot my thirst and ran back into my room, where I hid under the blankets until sunrise. From that night forward, it followed me everywhere. It towered in the corner of whatever room I was in, watching me as though I were the most amusing mouse this cat had ever seen. Its oppressive and dark energy was nearly overwhelming to me, yet I seemed to be the only one to sense it. The dog didn't react to it. However, around this time the dog developed a vicious temperament only towards me. He would snarl and try to bite me if I got too close to him, and would growl if I maintained eye contact with him for more than just a few seconds. He was a very sweet dog to everyone else, and we had been close for several years until this time. The cat's attitude towards me also changed. It began avoiding rooms I was in, but, like the dog, seemed not to notice the actual shadow. I didn't know what to do. I was a practicing Satanist and had read that true followers who had completed the ritual were given a guardian to watch over them. But I hadn't actually done the ritual, and how could this malevolent, shadowy entity be called a guardian? I could feel its joy as I tossed and turned at night. Over a few weeks, the terror I had felt receded, and I began to understand this being, whatever it was here to stay with me. That yes, it loved to see me in fear, but not just me. It wanted to evoke fear and hatred in everyone and everything. To this day, I don't have a label for this being.
and I don't think I ever will.
What I am about to tell you is 100% true as far as I know. Some of the details may be unintentionally exaggerated or embellished, as it's been many years since some of these events occurred. That said, the following events still creep me out to this day. In November 1998, my family moved into a brand new house on a newly developed neighbourhood in Australia. It was gorgeous, and the neighbours were all so friendly. There was even a park down the road. Opposite our house was an old 1839 Georgian mansion. The entire neighbourhood had been developed on the old farmland that this manor had once owned and resided over. From day one, that place intimidated me. I was 4 years old at the time, and the events of the first story occurred sometime before my brother was born. So at the most, I must have been about 6. For a good length of time during those few years, I met them, the Shadow People. I was not asleep when I met them, and it was not at night either. In fact, at the time of encountering them, I wasn't even scared. Well, not for the whole encounter anyway. My father would have been at work, and my mother outside hanging the washing, or attending to some other chore. I was completely alone in the house, playing games. Even as a child, I would realize the moment when they would arrive. Suddenly, there would be a shift in the atmosphere. The feel of the room would change, and I would know that I was no longer alone. Then, I would catch a glimpse of a shadow. Each time the shadow would appear very dark, but not solid. It would have a clear outline that would cast against the wall. Never would the shadow be attached to anything, almost as if it were on its own, an independent entity. Every time I saw it, it would start running away, as if I'd caught it. I used to think of it as a game, and I'd start chasing it around a circle. The way our house was set up, you could walk from the living room to the hallway, to the kitchen, to the office, and then the living room again, without lifting your hand off the inner wall. As I chased the shadow, it would get faster and faster until it dashed into another room before I could reach it. As soon as I lost eye contact, it was gone. As soon as it disappeared, the atmosphere in the house would return to its previous feeling of emptiness. Now, however, it felt gaping and heavy, as if being so suddenly alone was too strong a feeling, too sinister. My child self would run outside to my mother and tell her what happened. It happened so many times that to this day, my mother still gets the creeps when I mention it. Looking back, I feel as though I might not have been as alone as I thought after the shadow disappeared. Perhaps the sinister feeling had not been emptiness, but another entity filling the space. A second, darker shadow, whatever it might have been. I'm glad that I had the sense to run outside to my mother when the first shadow disappeared. That was not the end of the strangeness. In the years since, my parents have told me about other things which happened in the house. Things I don't recall, as I was too young to remember or note their significance. For example, how our surround sound speakers would turn on by themselves, with soft whispering voices, saying things just on the verge of being understandable. Sometimes this would happen, even when the speakers were switched off and unplugged. My parents made complaints to the manufacturers, and had people come in to see if perhaps they were picking up aeroplane signals or whatnot, but no explanation was ever found nor given. On another occasion, my mother and godmother were looking out the living room window at the mansion across the street when they saw what was described as a silhouette of a grey lady in one of the windows. Later, I found out that the house that we lived in was built on top of a burial site for the indigenous Australians who were forced to work on the land. These people had been denied both burial rights of their own people and culture and those of the church. As such, it was unholy ground. The gravesite's inhabitants forever lost, seeking the final rest, which was denied to them.
I am a firm believer of the paranormal. Ghosts, aliens, the works. However, up until just a few years ago, I had not had any encounters with any paranormal entities. Since then, however, I have had multiple experiences which I believe are connected to and caused by the same entity. In 2014, I moved into a new apartment with my new roommate and my then boyfriend. Not long after we moved in, I was rummaging through a storage closet on the apartment's balcony. It was night and I had the closet door open as well as the light on. While I was repacking a box, I noticed a dark shape move out the corner of my eye. When I looked towards the closet, I saw a dark, humanoid figure dart inside of it. Initially, I thought that someone had climbed onto the porch somehow, but found no one in the closet when I looked. Confused and a little shaken, I shut the closet door and never opened it again until I moved. A few weeks after that, I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. I was lying in bed, talking to my boyfriend beside me. It felt almost like a time jump. 1 second we were talking, and the next it was dead silent. I opened my eyes and saw a face right in front of mine. Although it appeared to be a human face, it looked like it was painted to resemble that of a tiger. It got harder to breathe and I couldn't move, regardless of how hard I tried. I closed my eyes for what felt like minutes and opened them again, this time with no face looming above me. All at once, it felt like sound and fresh air returned to the room. Normality restored. I fell asleep quickly, despite the ordeal. Both this and the closet shadow I blamed on my imagination. I must have been seeing things. The following year, I had moved into a new apartment with my boyfriend, as well as a very close friend of mine. One night, she asked me if I noticed anything strange in the house. I replied with no, not having seen anything out of the ordinary the night before. She then proceeded to tell me that she had woken up in the middle of the night and had seen a tall, dark figure standing in her open closet. My mind instantly went back to the night I saw the shadow person in my old apartment's closet. Fear instantly washed over me. However, instead of making a big deal out of it, we decided to play it off as a joke. We even named the entity Toby from the Paranormal Activity series. From then on, whenever something strange would happen in the house, we would say that Toby did it. It was always light-hearted, as nothing severe ever happened to warrant a more serious response. That said, I could not escape the sense of unease I felt, especially when alone in the apartment. I am not sure if my friend ever saw the shadow figure again. If she did, she never told me. When the time came to move again, I was stupid. This time it was just going to be me and my now fiancé. So, as the last of the boxes were taken out, I asked my friend who was going to get custody of Toby. This was a question I never should have asked. After some joking, I said that I would take him and told Toby to come see your new house as I left the old apartment. It was only a few weeks into living in the new place when the activity started. In the beginning, we would hear knocks on the wall. Loud knocks. I complained to management, but they told me that no one lived on either side of me or above, as the apartment complex was brand new. From there, it escalated. We would find that the thermostat had been turned way down. well below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Even weirder, we would, and still do, find puddles of water on the floor, with no way for the water to have got there on its own. There would be large puddles in the middle of the wood, nowhere near a sink or tub, and not created by a leak in the floor or ceiling. Already in the habit of blaming Toby, my fiancé and I continue to reference the unknown entity as the source of all inexplicable events in the apartment. Nothing violent ever happened, but we were scared of what this dark entity might do next. I believe that whatever had followed us did not have good intentions. We decided to stop paying attention to it. After that, the activity ceased almost entirely. Regardless, I still get scared when home alone. Although we haven't seen any dark figures in corners lately, I'm always worried that one will run by me when I'm the only one home. Every now and then we will find the thermostat turned to a very cold setting, or find a stray puddle of water on the floor, almost like it is reminding us that it's still here.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Of course, go and listen to part 2 of this collaboration over on Mort's channel. The link is both on screen now and in the description. Remember, the more you know, the more there is to fear.